Welcome to Templars Through the Line, our responsible business podcast. Today, we'll be shining the spotlight on gender violence, and I am delighted to have with me the delectable Dr. Kemi Dasilva-Ibru of WARIF. Welcome, Dr. Dasilva.
Thank you so much for having me, Oyeyemi.
Very excited to be speaking with you today, but for the benefit of our audience, I'd like you to just speak generally to what the vision behind WARIF was and is.
So WARIF is the acronym for the Women at Risk International Foundation, and it's a non-profit organization that addresses the prevalence of rape, sexual violence, and trafficking of girls and women across communities in Nigeria.
How have you achieved what you set out to do, and what have been the significant milestones that you have recorded since 2016?
So when we decided to incorporate WARIF to tackle this problem, the very first thing that we recognized was a dearth of data. For us to effectively measure impact, we needed to have a needs assessment done. And then we needed a framework because we were dealing with a problem of such magnitude and with so many layers that if we were to shift the needle, we couldn't look at it through one lens. So at WARIF, we have a unique approach. We address the issue under our health, education, and community service pillars. Since we started the center in December of 2016, we're close to almost 5,000 beneficiaries. Sadly, the youngest is only 7 months of age, and the oldest is in her 60s. Since we started, we've been able to introduce an 0800 helpline that's 24 hours, allowing, again, survivors to reach us, especially if they can't physically walk into the facility. We've also incorporated monthly group counseling sessions. Women go home and they don't recognize that this happens to others because they're not allowed to speak about it. And so group counseling session empowers her and gives her motivation to improve and recognize that it wasn't her fault. Since we started in 2017 with 500, we're now 11,000 strong. And we've used these women and we've increased the number of cases that are now seen in sexual assault referral centers.
Gender violence is a business problem. Oftentimes it's spoken as something external to, like just social, external to business experience. But I believe it is a human capital problem. And so could you share your perspective on that?
So my thoughts on gender-based violence is it's a pervasive problem, and it finds its way into the very fabric of every sector, including, like you rightly said, the business sector. As a social issue, it's a global issue. It's an issue that in Nigeria affects 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 10 boys before the age of 18. So already, if you're looking at it through numbers, we're 200 million people. Half of us are women, and we're a young country. 64% of us are under the age of 25. We're looking at over 100,000 girls. Some would say 10,000 girls a day and 5,000 boys a day enduring this act of violence. So through a business perspective, my opinion is you have to look at it through the workforce impact and then the economic impact. When you look at it through the workforce impact, you're already seeing women in workplaces like this that having endured acts of violence or even sexual harassment in the workplace reduce their number of hours. And that number of hours of productivity that could, again, if you look at it through the lens of a business, would benefit that business.
Absolutely.
When you look at it through her lens, this is a woman that cannot increase her value, cannot increase her wages, cannot increase her leadership opportunities. And if she leaves her workplace to start again, she's enduring the ageism that comes with an older woman looking for work again in that job employment space. Now, if you look at it through an economic impact, gender-based violence affects 2% of Nigeria's annual GDP of $440 billion. That's $8.8 billion that's lost. So no, it's not of anybody's benefit, including the business world, to ignore the issue of gender-based violence.
I really, really, really like the statistics you've given. More importantly, how you have taken both the pragmatic and the legal aspects and woven them together. So let's talk about, I would like to say that there's been significant development from a legal perspective. So you have the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, which passed in 2015, which has now been ratified across 34 states nationwide, right? And what that means is enforcement capacity has significantly increased, right? You also have, previously we had just 2 sexual offenders registers. Now we have about 10 states that have sexual offenders registers maintained by NATIP. So I think that's significant progress. You also have the courts also. There was a major incident maybe last month or 2 months ago where a doctor who was prominent was sentenced to life imprisonment for rape of a young girl, right? And those are not common incidents, and that has happened now. I think we've made a lot of progress. My question to you would be, do you think that's enough?
So have we made progress?
Yeah.
Yes, we have. Is it enough? Certainly not enough. Let's look at what you just described first with the laws. Yes, we do have the VAP, the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act. And yes, it has been ratified in 34 out of 36 states. And it's a wonderful law. It's a law that removed all the antiquated language that you lawyers use. It's a law that became more practical in terms of punitive measures against alleged perpetrators. But my question is, how effective is the law? How well is it being implemented across these 34 states? So therefore, when we look at the prosecution and conviction rates, have they increased significantly because of the ratification? Those are the questions that I ask. And then through legal aid, I always say that at the end of the day, we have a wonderful legal system, but you have to have a situation, you have to have an ecosystem that allows for people to be able to access that legal system. For example, at the center where we work, we do see survivors that are seeking justice, but these are survivors that can't afford legal aid. These are survivors that don't know how to reach out to a lawyer. These are survivors that on a good day would say to you that I know who did it to me. And I probably have brilliant eyewitness testimony, but unfortunately, I don't know what else to do. So this is where partnerships like the one we have with the Templar Legal Clinic is so critical, because then we're able to leverage off the expertise of an organization and a firm like yours. We're able to offer pro bono survivors legal assistance, and we're able to assist them also in navigating the terrain when it comes to the laws. So yes, as medical professionals, forensic medical examinations are carried out routinely by us. And yes, we are more than proficient in being able to describe as a result of that why it is that this alleged perpetrator should be convicted. But it's helpful when you have a legal clinic that can ensure that we're doing things in an appropriate fashion.
I think we've delved into enforcement and it's clear, but I think one thing that prevents effective enforcement is also the underreporting, right? The statistics say that it's the most underreported human rights infringement, gender violence, violence against persons in general, and especially women. Without saying anything, there's a stigma from society. What are the other unique challenges that you have seen working in this space since 2016 that impact enforcement?
I think we have to look at the drivers, like you said. First we have to recognize that we're living in a country, there's a low middle income country, where there's a patriarchy. Women are naturally subjugated on a daily basis. And this is the way of the world through the lens of that average Nigerian woman. And then you spoke of the cultural practices. We do have wonderful heritage. We have wonderful cultural practices. But unfortunately, we also have harmful practices that hurt and damage not just a woman's self-worth, but physically harms her. day to day in many homes and communities across Nigeria. We have to look at the economic drivers. We have to appreciate that there's very little representation when it comes to gender equality in this part of the world. I mean, when we look at the House of Senate or the House of Assembly, women and female representation is still in the single digits. We're still very much the lowest in sub-Saharan Africa.
Absolutely.
Then we have to also look at the political drivers, the political will to protect women. I mean, how effective is that? If we look at the landscape through, again, even education, the average community would have, say, 70% of young girls starting out in primary school, but only 10% wind up in tertiary institutions. What happened to that 60%?
The attrition.
Exactly.
It's quite significant.
So there are many intersections and there are many overlaps. And this is why gender-based violence is such a complex, multifaceted problem. Because to address it, you have to look at all the various sectors and you have to look at them not as silos, but you have to look at them as a collective building block and try and fix it as best as you can.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that perspective. I want us to go back to the workplace. So mental health, stability of the female gender in the workspace. And I mean, let's not, because when you say gender, it goes beyond females, right, in the workspace. How do you think corporates can support enforcement and also protect their employees from gender violence?
So one of the things that we offer at the WARIF organization is sexual harassment training programs for organizations like this and other organizations that, I believe would benefit from programs like that. Reason being that if you're looking at a problem that affects 1 in 4 women, then certainly every organization does have to some degree the power dynamics that becomes unequal when you view the lens of a supervisor and an employee. And so therefore, that's the ideal perfect storm for sexual harassment to occur. If you allow your staff to understand that you care enough to bring in proper standardized programs where their issues are addressed, where perhaps, in terms of the reporting hierarchy that has been laid out, the confidentiality of this alleged survivor at this point in time is also critical. Mm-hmm. And then finally, in ensuring that punitive measures will be handed out as and when these cases occur, I think then you create a healthy work environment. Now in the community, because we have to remember that the community brings into the workplace a lot of the baggage, including that patriarchy and the cultural practices that we spoke of. And so we also have to recognize that, which again, as an organization, we tackle, because we recognize that you can't look at a country, you can't look at communities, again, within small ecosystems. You have to appreciate that this is a problem that's pervasive and a problem that cuts across all. And so your programs and your awareness has to be directed not just into one area, say the workforce as we're describing, but in the larger picture, in the community as well.
Fantastic. Okay, so I know that you do a lot of work around preserving the case through your work with first response to victims, in engagement, in preserving their clothes and all of that to enable forensic evidence, to enable us being able to prove, because the burden of proof is quite high. Could you speak or enlighten us on your work?
Let's start with the young girl that has endured this horrific act. 90% of the time, the perpetrator is known to her. So that brings in the family dynamics. Many a time, the community shames her, ostracizes her, so makes her feel like she is carrying that burden of proof because something was done to her, but it was because she did something wrong.
Yeah.
And so this young girl, no voice, no place, the family more concerned with the facade of the family name and hiding the act, as opposed to ensuring that she seeks proper health care and she gets the justice that she deserves. What happens to her? First, we have to raise awareness so that she's aware that we're there, standing in the gap for her, and that we have a facility that is free, it's a walk-in facility, and that she can come in. The second thing that we have to raise awareness to is that when she does come in, it's important for us, like you rightly said, for her to come in unbathed, preferably holding the clothing when the act occurred. This is a big ask. This is a traumatized girl that received no support whatsoever, made to feel ashamed. And so the first thing you do when you feel ashamed is you want to wash away the shame. The next thing you want to do is you want to throw away the evidence because it's a reminder, it's a trigger. And so that's where the work begins, raising awareness out in the community and telling girls and boys, men and women, that if these acts occur, we need you to come in. Now, when you come in, ideally, through the lens of forensics and the forensic medical examination, we should ideally see you within 72 hours. Because again, beyond 72 hours, the necessary DNA specimen that we've retrieved, we can no longer use in trying to prove this alleged perpetrator if indeed the one that, committed the act. Beyond the medical aspects where we're treating cuts and injuries, we're checking for HIV, we're checking for pregnancy, we then have to counsel you. We have to start the long journey of healing. And all of this has to happen as and when you're prepared and ready.
And all because of the burden of
And
proof.
all because we then, at the end of the day, will then say to you, because 9 out of 10, unfortunately, if we're not able to retrieve the necessary forensics, it now left to eyewitness testimony. It's now a function of him versus her. It's a function of, how reliable a witness are you? And this is a broken person, again, with no support. And so we have to build her up if indeed it's something that she wants. And then we have to look towards her and look towards her healing so that this helps her to stand in that courtroom next to you or a colleague of yours and give testimony so that that alleged perpetrator is indeed convicted.
I guess there's still a lot of work for us lawyers to do, certainly in getting data, getting forensics sorted, and getting the law to also make that burden of proof easier to implement, because there is a way that the law can be set up to support this process as well. So, Dr. Dasilva, as we wrap up, I want to get your perspective on what the outlook for the future is. So we have the Sustainable Development Goals, which all, especially Goal 5, which speaks to protecting women, protecting the female gender, protecting people from violence, and also general innovations globally and also in Nigeria seeking to address this space. What do you think are the urgent, and maybe we should put them in two baskets, the low-hanging fruits, right? And then the urgent priorities that must be faced as we venture to increase protection and also prevent perpetrators from succeeding or escaping enforcement.
So like you said, the Sustainable Development Goal 5 is my wheelhouse. That speaks to gender equality, it speaks to the empowerment of women. To achieve this objective is a very complex one. I mean, it's said that for us in Nigeria to achieve gender parity, it'll take another century. So unfortunately, that's not where you and I would be. When we look at the data, Nigeria is 118 out of 134 countries on the Gender Equality Index. So we have a lot of work to do. And I think that it's work that can only be achieved with collaboration and partnerships. We need to address this public health issue as a public health issue. It is not just one of the many issues. It's actually a critical public health issue that speaks to all aspects, affects everyone in a community.
And as you said, pervades.
And it's pervasive in every single sector.
Absolutely.
So the low-hanging fruit is each and every one of us recognizing our role. It starts with individuals. We need to be good bystanders.
Absolutely.
And then from there, it becomes more of looking at your community and then being responsible in the community. The community shaming has to stop. We need to stop pointing fingers and shying away when these crimes occur, because it is a crime, and I'm sure you'll agree with me.
Yes, it is.
And then beyond the community, then we can now start to look at the macro, the bigger ecosystems. We can now start to look at the policies. We can now start to look at the laws we spoke of. We can now start to look at the implementation of them. And then in my part of the world, the essential services. We need to improve on the essential services, because the only way we can successfully shift this needle is by scale. And the only way we can scale is with partnerships and a good, strong roadmap that is tried and tested and measured. Data is key.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Dasilva. It has been a very interesting conversation today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And it's a pleasure being here.